AM 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. CBC Music Live. Head into the big venues, intimate concert halls, and small stages. Celebrate live music the way it was meant to be. Share in an unmistakable energy of being shoulder to shoulder with music fans and face to face with some of Canada's best musicians.
It's such an honor and a pleasure to play here.
CBC Music Live, brand new season. And catch past episodes right now on CBC Jam.
You know the feeling of finding a really good podcast? Or the feeling of someone always being there, like your favorite radio show? Stream CBC Podcasts, CBC Music, and CBC Radio anytime, anywhere. Download.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon, I'm Josh Crabb in Winnipeg. At noon, it's mostly cloudy and -7 downtown. It's -4 in Victoria Beach and -23 in Roblin. It's the social media post that has all of Canada buzzing. Donald Trump says unless Canada stems the flow of illegal migrants and drugs into the United States, he will be imposing a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods. The Trudeau government has been quick to respond, with the Prime Minister having a telephone conversation last night with the President-elect. And from there, Trudeau began organizing a Premier Summit.
One of the really important things is that we be all pulling together on this. The Team Canada approach is what works. That's where, putting aside partisanship, that's where I reached out immediately to Doug Ford to agree with him that we would have a First Ministers meeting this week to talk about the United States. Talked with François Legault and some other premiers as well. There's work to do, but we know how to do it.
Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew says Canada has some work to do to prevent a possible 25% tariff. He says the tariff would have a $2,000 hit on the gross domestic product per capita. He says we can't let that happen.
We look at the potential impact of a 25% tariff. All sorts of stats we could share. The bottom line is it would mean a recession for our province. We can't have that happen, especially as we're starting to make progress on healthcare and education and making a lot of good investments. We want to keep that momentum going.
Kinew says one of the ways to address some of the concerns about both drugs and migrants is to deal with the shortfall in staffing of the RCMP. And he says if Canada doesn't bring its defense spending up to 2%, a Trump government will always use that to hammer Canada on trade. An advocate says now is the time for Winnipeg police to start wearing body cameras if they want to rebuild trust. Former MKO Grand Chief and MMIWG advocate Sheila North says she has seen the short video circulating of the deadly police shooting on the weekend at a Unicity bus shelter. North says body camera footage would help tell the full story of what is happening.
We need to get to another point where we have another level of understanding of what's going on in the streets and what's going on in these kind of interactions. Are we misguided? Do we not, when we're not seeing the full picture? Like I say, it's just another tool, but I think it's an absolutely necessary tool.
North says body-worn cameras may also give some officers pause when it comes to how they deal with people in a crisis. Beef prices are hitting record highs. Brenna Grant is with CanFax, a beef statistics firm. She says cattle prices are between 45 and 65% higher than the 5-year average.
Globally, we've got a growing population, a growing middle class, and they want more protein. And it's not just beef, it's pork and poultry as well.
Drought in parts of the country means feed prices are rising for ranchers, and many of them have scaled back their operations. That means Canada's beef supply is dwindling, even with growing global demand. Today is Election Day in Nova Scotia, but it turns out some Nova Scotians still don't know where they will be voting. Due to the strike at Canada Post, many voter information cards weren't mailed out. The information is available on the Elections Nova Scotia website, but it's being overwhelmed with traffic and isn't always loading properly. As well, there are reports the province's information phone lines have been jammed all morning. Toronto police have arrested an Ontario woman accused of selling fake Taylor Swift tickets. Police say fans are out tens of thousands of dollars, and they believe there are more victims out there. Magda Gabrisalesi has more.
Taylor Swift fans who say they've been scammed by a Burlington woman are now thrilled that she's been arrested by Toronto police. Denise Tisser, also known as Denise Blackwell online, is facing several charges, including 32 counts of fraud under $5,000. Toronto police say 28 victims paid a total of just under $70,000 for Swift concert tickets that didn't come through.
We were devastated.
Namita Sapra told CBC last week she and her friend bought 2 tickets from Tisser for Swift's first Eras show in Toronto, only to find out hours before the concert the tickets didn't exist.
And freaking out that day when we found out.
After learning about the arrest, she says she feels like this is the first step in a long journey to justice. CBC reached out to Tisser but did not get a response. Magda Gebreselassie, CBC News, Toronto.
And finally, a new community workshop in Dauphin wants to give creative residents a place to create. The Creative Common, Dauphin's makerspace, just received an $80,000 grant from the province. The money will help renovate the building to house the makerspace. When it opens, crafters and artisans can buy a monthly membership to use the tools in the workshop. At first, it will include a 3D printer and woodworking machines. Dauphin's economic development manager, Martin Van Loon, says the makerspace will help local entrepreneurs.
It's proven in other communities to be really good for entrepreneurship. It's been really good for people to, if they walk around with an idea, not having to spend a lot of money investing in that idea, but just come and first of all talk to others about it and then try to develop something.
The makerspace will open this coming spring. And that is CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local news is at 12:30.
Good afternoon, Manitoba. Gotta love that Radio Noon theme song. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, 97.9 FM in Brandon, 100.9 FM in Thompson. We're also broadcasting live on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel and on the CBC Listen app. I'm Emily Brass, your host today on Radio Noon. Here's what's coming up on the show. A Brandon women's shelter is hoping to spread awareness around domestic violence by making T-shirts that tell survivors' stories. We'll hear more about this initiative from the Women's Resource Center. Winnipeg is finally covered in the white stuff, while other parts of the province have already been dealing with piles of snow. Were you ready for the snowfall? A weather scientist will take your questions. But first, what President-elect Donald Trump's proposed 25% tariff could mean for Manitoba's manufacturing industry. It's 7 minutes after 12 o'clock, and you're listening to Radio Noon. Well, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump dropped a bombshell last night, threatening a 25% tariff that could start as soon as his inauguration day on January 20th. Manitoba's manufacturing industry makes up 10% of the province's economic output. It accounts for $9 billion worth of goods each year in exports, and a lot of that goes to the United States. Terry Shaw is the regional vice president of the Prairies with the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, and we reached him here in Winnipeg. Hi, Terry.
Hello.
So what impact could a 25% tariff have on Manitoba's manufacturing industry?
It would clearly be very devastating. Again, as you just mentioned, 1 out of every $10 generated in the Manitoba economy comes courtesy of a manufacturer. But what I want to ensure everybody is reminded of is that this will be just as damaging to U.S. consumers and manufacturers as well. Again, Donald Trump controls tariffs on goods that U.S. manufacturers purchase, and U.S. manufacturers purchase hundreds of billions of dollars every year of Canadian products that they just simply won't be able to replace. So this is very much a lose-lose situation.
And what kind of reaction do you think he's going to get from those businesses in the United States, based on this proposal of his?
Yeah, so we've been working with our partners at the National Association of Manufacturers, which is the kind of CME's U.S. counterpart. No formal word from them yet, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but they are a very active partner of CME, and we have been having conversations with them on what this might look like and some of our collective messaging that we're going to take to our federal and national government partners, both in Canada and the United States.
Okay, to be continued on that. So, in the meantime, do you think there might be some job losses here in our province?
I think it's too early to tell, which is kind of part of the problem. I've been having a whole host of calls, not only with folks like yourself, but with our member companies. And it's the policy uncertainty. Do I try and rush my goods to market to beat the tariffs? Do I try and bring in raw materials to, from the United States that I need for my manufacturing processes to try and get ahead of potential Canadian retaliatory tariffs? Do I start working with my customers and renegotiating pricing in the case of, right? So there's a whole host of uncertainty right now. I don't think any job losses are on the horizon today, but should these tariffs come to pass, it'll certainly be something that we are very fearful will have to occur.
So, do you think manufacturers should start trying to find new markets for their goods between now and January 20th? And if so, how hard would that be?
In fact, I don't want to say impossible, but incredibly difficult. Again, we're talking about billions of dollars every day in goods that cross the Canadian and U.S. border. And some of these are very integrated. We have manufacturers here in Manitoba that bring up chassis from the United States, do some manipulation to them, move them back down to the United States for sale, right? We purchase goods from them, they purchase goods for us. We're just not going to find new markets. Certainly not at the scale of billions of dollars every day.
Okay. And now, for the everyday Manitobans, what might this tariff mean for them?
Again, as goes manufacturing, so goes the economy, right? Manufacturing is a significant component of the Manitoban and Canadian economies. So anything that negatively impacts manufacturers will have trickle-down effects, right? On top of that, if manufacturers can't get their goods produced, if they can't get the raw materials produced because of cost concerns or pricing disruptions and things like that, then they can't send them to market. Cars won't be sold. Recreational vehicles won't be sold. Trailers won't be sold. Everything that ultimately is purchased by Canadians is manufactured product, be it foodstuffs, equipment, or otherwise. So the impacts are going to be widespread.
Okay. So do you think maybe this is just a bargaining chip for Donald Trump? Like if officials manage to negotiate it down to 10 or 15%, is that a good compromise? Where do you think he's going with this?
Yeah. So tariffs are bad, period. Right. So if it's not 25 but 15, that's still 15% on top of billions of dollars every day. So I dare not, try and forecast what Donald Trump is thinking. I do hope that ultimately this is not really about 25% tariffs, but maybe some other policy initiative he's seeking to push. But that's, for me to speak on that would be purely speculative.
Yeah, it's hard to say at this point. So if Canada decides to impose retaliatory tariffs, what do you think that could mean for Manitoba manufacturers?
Yeah, it just compounds the problems, right? Again, tariffs are bad whether they're equal on both sides of the border or not, right? A lot of folks and a lot of talk recently around inflationary concerns, and the reality is tariff is a cost increase imposed by government on manufactured goods, right? And so those manufactured goods and those increased costs have to be borne by somebody, and ultimately it's the end consumer.
Because I suppose manufacturers here in this province probably import some of their materials from the United States, and then they'd have to be shipping it back to the United States, so it would get tariffed twice, right?
Potentially. Again, there's a lot of goods that cross the border multiple times before final completion. Maybe not so much in Manitoba, although there is some. We've got large vehicle manufacturers. We've got aerospace manufacturers who are bringing, products up and across the border multiple times in the course of repair, maintenance, building, implementing and adding parts, value add processes, things like that. So it is a consideration. And again, outside of the cost, there's the added complexity, right? And the added and unnecessary burden of, do we still do this? Do we wait? Do we try and seek other markets? Do we try and seek other suppliers? It's just, again, the policy certainty is really damaging economically.
Yeah. So what do you want to see from the provincial and federal governments in the months leading up to Trump's inauguration?
Again, CME has been working with our government partners at all levels and just calling on them to continue negotiating with our trading partners, our largest trading partner in the United States, for some positive resolution here. And for us, that would be no tariffs.
And yeah, do you think that, like, where is that going at this point? Like, do you have the appointments lined up to speak to the officials, or?
It's early days. Yeah. So we've been doing a lot of chatting with our members and chatting with the media right now. I do know federally, our national team has been reaching out to our federal government partners, and that's not new. We have ongoing conversations with these folks. So with the news on the tariff increases and the amount, 25% is a staggering amount. Work is ongoing and conversations will continue until we have some resolution on this.
And as you mentioned, 25% is a staggering amount. Like, what was your reaction when you heard that news?
It's incalculable. Again, we're talking, tens, if not hundreds. I can't even do the math in my head, of billions of dollars increase with these tariffs, right? And so what we need is some certainty around what we're actually going to see come January 20th, if anything. And so that's really where our focus is right now. That and a reminder to all that these tariffs are just as damaging to U.S. manufacturers, U.S. consumers, and the U.S. economy. So while clearly my primary consideration is Canadian and Manitoba manufacturers, we have to continue reminding everybody that this is just as damaging to U.S. manufacturers and the U.S. economy.
Okay. Well, Terry, thanks so much. And we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you.
Terry Shaw is Regional Vice President of the Prairies with Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters.
The CBC News app delivers the answers you want to know and need to know.
What an extraordinary scene.
The breaking stories that shape your world. Reporting from the scene onto your screens.
Dropping the 8 now. We are just approaching Gaza.
Your source for mobile news. Delivered when you want, where you want.
This situation has changed very quickly.
The CBC News app. Download for free.
It's 12:16 right now. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM and 990 AM in Winnipeg, 105.3 FM in Dauphin, 1230 AM in Churchill. We're also broadcasting live on the CBC Manitoba YouTube channel and the CBC Listen app. I'm Emily Brass, filling in as your host today. Right now in Winnipeg, it's -7 with light snow at the airport. 70% chance of flurries today here in Winnipeg with a high of -6. Tonight we're going down to a low of -11. Tomorrow, -7 and mainly cloudy, and periods of snow tomorrow night with a low of -12. Then Thursday, -10 is the high and cloudy. So we're definitely seeing a turn for the colder side. Well, still to come on the show, Winnipeg's finally covered in the white stuff, and other parts of the province have already been dealing with piles of snow. How ready were you for the snowfall? A weather scientist will join us in studio to answer your questions on the mild fall we've had and what to expect from the winter weather ahead. And then after that, well, we have more coming up. A Brandon women's shelter is hoping to spread awareness around domestic violence by making T-shirts that tell survivor stories. And we're going to hear more about this initiative from the Women's Resource Center. That's coming right up on Radio Noon. "18 minutes after 12 o'clock, I'm Emily Brass, filling in today on Radio Noon. Manitoba has the highest rate of domestic violence in Canada. 1 in 4 women in Manitoba experiences intimate partner violence. On this last week of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, a Brandon shelter is launching 2 very unique campaigns. One is called Postcards for Positivity. The other is the Clothesline Project. To tell us more, we've reached Nicole Funk, supervising domestic violence counselor with the Women's Resource Center in Brandon. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, how's it going?
Oh, pretty good, thanks. So what kind of demand for shelter have you been seeing in recent years at the Women's Resource Center?
So demand for shelter, there's a huge rise right now, continuing since COVID in intimate partner violence and family violence. So individuals are trying to leave their homes with their kids and get to a safe place. So they are needing every kind of basic necessity there is.
And is that like more like anecdotally anyway compared to past years or?
I would say the isolation that happened in COVID definitely played a really big part in it.
Oh, okay. So that kind of changed the situation a bit.
It has, yeah, for sure.
Okay. So what are some of the most urgent services women and their families need that maybe still aren't being met, not just in Brandon, but in Manitoba overall?
I think just a huge one is feeling the safety to report these incidents and knowing that they're going to get followed up and they're going to get charged. Being able to access shelters and housing, to find housing, finding jobs and daycare spaces for their kids once they've gotten out. It's finding accessible and cost-efficient counseling services and programs that can help them. It's food security. Maybe it's relocation fees. It's safety planning with them to make sure they're getting to a safe spot where they're not going to be hurt anymore.
Okay. And are these needs like something that you think the province should be helping with, or like where should that assistance come from?
I think the province has definitely started helping a lot more with the change in government. We have been getting some extra funding for these programs and a lot more recognition for survivors. So I do definitely think that is something that is on the rise tremendously now.
Okay. Meanwhile, you've got some campaigns coming up here for the last week of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Tell us about Postcards of Positivity. What's the goal of that campaign?
Sure. So we do Postcards for Positivity. So we get individuals coming into the center. Staff makes them. We've taken them to the universities in Brandon here. And it's just really fun Christmas cards that we send out to all the shelters in Manitoba. And actually, we're sending one to a shelter in Columbia as well, for women and children who are in the shelter over the holiday season. So they get a personalized card for them and their kids. And it just kind of brightens up their holiday season a little bit.
Oh, wow. Okay. And, what kind of impact are you hoping those postcards have on the women and children who get them while they're staying in shelter?
We're hoping it just brings a smile to their face and gives them a little bit of joy. I mean, leaving your home and everything that you've built behind to start over and get themselves to a safe environment can feel hopeless and it can be hard and it's a huge transition. So if it can just bring them a little bit of joy in their day, that's all we want.
Okay. And another project you're launching this week is the Clothesline Project. What's that?
Yes. So the Clothesline Project has been going on for years. It originally started a group of women down in the States kind of didn't feel safe walking around at night, and so they started this project. So we have cutout T-shirts and cloth T-shirts where survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault can come in and they can write their story on them. They can give empowering words. They can use very derogative language if they want to towards their perpetrator, and it's all anonymous for survivors. So on Thursday, we will put up all of their T-shirts with all of their words and their stories and kind of showcase their stories for them in an anonymous way. So it's giving them back some of their power and control and giving their voice back to them.
Wow. Can you share some of the stories that they tell, when you're looking at these T-shirts, what you might see?
Yes, I can read you one of them. Let me find it here. So some of the ones that we have here is pain is not love. Stay with me. My current situation is not my final destination. Another one that they have on here is just you are not alone. I am a survivor. And this one I really like is not all wounds are visible.
These are great sayings and really, thought-provoking.
It is, yeah.
What's it been like, for survivors to share those messages as they've been making the shirts?
It can be triggering for some of them, but we also have a very low barrier safe space here. So they kind of know when they come into the center that they're free to say whatever they want. They're free to tell their story. There's no judgment, and they're being heard. So they find it very empowering to write their words down and give it out to the community, because people think, that this is something that happens to lower class individuals, but it's happening to everybody. So it's really a great project to get awareness out and put it kind of right in people's faces that this is happening to maybe their sister or their neighbor or their coworker.
Yeah, it's everywhere, and I guess it's often very silent.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it is.
So when people are in Princess Park, where you're going to be hanging these shirts up, and they read these messages, what do you hope the impact is?
We hope it brings awareness, that people kind of recognize the signs a little bit more. They ask questions, that they're not just staying silent and being a bystander. We want them to make noise. We want people to report what has happened to them. We have a really great working relationship with Brandon Police Service. So we want people to go report what has happened. We accompany them. We want it to be out there that this is such a huge community issue, and it's not a silent issue anymore. Things are being brought to light. It's being talked about more, and everybody can make a difference.
Yeah. And to know that there's someone there who can help you.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Nicole, thank you so much, and all the best with these projects launching.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
Nicole Funk is supervising domestic violence counselor with the Women's Resource Center in Brandon. It's 12:25. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, 97.9 FM in Verdun, 94.5 FM in The Paw. Well, we have new music from Cleefield, Manitoba's own Jason Kirkness. The country artist just released his latest album, and from that, we have the title track for you. This is What Got Me Here.
That 89 Danny in the side, I drove it home with one headlight. It barely ran, but it got me here. It was hard as hell, stacking bells. I was almost broke and you could tell, but it paid and it got me here. Yeah, talk about worn out. I've torn the soles out of these boots too many times. Been on the bench, been on the field. I won and lost, know how it feels. Yeah, that's what got me here. Every dim lit road, every door that closed just kept me moving on. Every dream being crushed, every push come to shove, that's what kept me standing strong. Never took the straightest path, didn't happen just like that. Wouldn't take it back, that's what got me here. I didn't know that summer love was exactly what it was. It didn't last, but it got me here. Fair weather friends, they come and go, but I won't forget the ones back home. They got my back and they got me here. Every dim lit road, every door that closed just kept me moving on. Every dream being crushed, every push come to shove, that's what kept me standing strong. Never took the straightest path, didn't happen just like that. Wouldn't take it back, that's what got me here. Wouldn't take it back, that's what got me here. Yeah, talk about worn out. I've had my heart worn out, torn out through the years. Been on a high, been on a low. I've seen the light, that's how I know. Wasn't easy, but it got me here. Every dim lit road, every door that closed just kept me moving on. Every dream being crushed, every push come to shove, that's what kept me standing strong. Never took the straightest path, didn't happen just like that. Wouldn't take it back, that's what got me here. Wouldn't take it back, that's what got me here. That 89 Dan in the side, I drove it home with one headlight. It barely ran, but it got me here.
Love that line. It barely ran, but it got me here. I think a lot of us could relate to vehicles like that. From Clevefield, Manitoba, that was Jason Kirkness with What Got Me Here. His new album by the same name is available now. Well, we're coming up on local news time. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, 100.9 FM in Thompson, 97.9 FM in Brandon. We're all also broadcasting live on the CBC Listen app and on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel. Thanks for everyone who's tuning in there. Well, still to come on the show, how are you doing now that most of Manitoba is covered in snow? If you have any questions about winter weather down the road, Scott Kaler from Weather Logics will take your questions. He's a weather scientist, so he should be able to give you some pretty good answers, whether it's about the really mild November we had and or about the snow and what's still to come. Your news is coming up next.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon, I'm Josh Crabb in Winnipeg at 12:30. It's mostly cloudy and -6 downtown, cloudy and -19 in Brandon and -9 in Thompson with light snow. The union representing Winnipeg transit drivers says their working conditions remain dangerous. They held a rally outside City Hall this morning demanding the city do more to improve safety. CBC's Cameron McLean was there.
Transit Union President Chris Scott says safety has gotten worse in the nearly 8 years since a Winnipeg driver was stabbed to death on the job. If another death occurs, he says blood will be on the hands of government leaders who failed to act. The city has been exploring options for new shields to protect drivers, but Scott says no decisions have been made. Incidents have decreased since the city launched a new community safety team earlier this year, but Scott says there aren't enough of them to cover the entire transit system. The union says there have been 201 safety incidents on buses so far this year, a 15% decrease from the same point last year. But Scott says drivers are still feeling burnt out and threatening to leave the job, which could jeopardize the rollout of the city's new primary transit network next year. Cameron McLean, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew says Canada has some work to do to prevent a possible 25% tariff by President-elect Donald Trump. Yesterday, Trump said he would impose the tariff on goods coming in from Canada and Mexico if something isn't done to curtail drugs and migrants. Today, at the Association of Manitoba Municipalities meeting, Kinew says a 25% tariff would have a $2,000 hit on the gross domestic product per capita. He says we have to act.
One of the things we got to do, we got to hit this 2% defense spending NATO target. If Canada is not upholding our obligation in terms of what we invest in the Canadian Armed Forces, the Trump administration is going to use that as something to hit us over the head with in the trade conversation.
Kinew says to tackle the drug and migrant issue, Canada has to address the RCMP staffing shortage. And finally, a new makerspace will open in Dauphin next spring to help crafters, artists, and tinkerers with their projects. The Creative Commons Dauphin's makerspace will offer access to tools like a 3D printer and woodworking machines. The makerspace has just received an $80,000 provincial grant to help open its doors. Chair Joe Houston says this space will be a home base for a community of creatives.
Makerspaces are often seen as like a third place. They're a place where you can go and be welcome just to do what you need to do. It's a launch pad for innovation, entrepreneurship, and a place where you can gather and share ideas.
The Creative Commons Dauphin's Makerspace will open in 2 phases. The first phase will include a 3D printer, woodworking shop, and a classroom. They hope to add a sewing workshop and a recording studio later on. And that is CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local news is at 1:30.
Wow, there's really something for everyone there.
Totally, definitely a good way to get into a few things too.
No kidding. Recording studio? That's got podcasters and musicians written all over it.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Josh.
You're welcome.
That's Josh Crabb joining us from the CBC Manitoba Newsroom. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1. And still to come, we have a weather expert coming up to take your calls on the snow that came, on the mild fall that we've had, what to look forward to, you can call us at 204-780-0893 or text us at 204-588-7355. But before we get to your calls, we've got Riley Lachuk here with an update. So what do we need to know about what happened with the weather so far?
I mean, it was, at least in Winnipeg yesterday, kind of felt like we flipped that switch, right?
Yes.
Like it was almost like fall to winter in a matter of hours.
Yeah, and in fact, I saw ice already forming on the river.
Yes.
It's like on the same day. Like it just really seemed like it hit us yesterday.
Well, here it is. It's here to stay for the
and
winter.
you said it was coming.
We did see, of course, a lot more snow even in the last 7 days across the west. So places like Swan River into Dauphin, into that Riding Mountain region, really getting a lot more snow than we've seen here in Winnipeg. But hey, we've got it now, so let's enjoy
Embrace it.
Exactly. -7 in Winnipeg at the moment. Compare that to Brandon right now at -19 degrees, so quite a temperature difference just a couple hours down the highway. -12 in Dauphin. Thompson's at -9 at the moment. There is a bit of clearing, and that's where we've seen some of these really cold temperatures, colder than normal for this time of the year through the west, where we've actually seen a mostly sunny sky, a mix of sun and clouds through Dauphin, a sunnier sky into Brandon and into that southwest corner of the province. Here in Winnipeg, we're hanging on to that cloud and really much of the northern part of the province under that cloud deck as well at the moment. Expect that to continue, maybe a couple of stray little isolated flurries, and kind of what you see is what you get, at least here in Winnipeg, is a mainly cloudy sky. Into Wednesday, maybe we'll get a fleeting glimpse of the sun here in Winnipeg by the time we get to the late afternoon, but we're kind of stuck in this cloud cover for the next few days, at least here in the Red River Valley. Looking at a high of I've got -5 for Winnipeg today, -4 in Gimli. Compare that to Brandon, Verdun, -14s, -10 in Dauphin for the afternoon, -7 for Winnipeg tomorrow. Chance we could see a couple of flurries yet through the early part of Thursday, and then we see temperatures kind of diving off, -13 for Friday and -12 for Saturday. So we're I think a little more than just easing into it.
Yeah, that's quite a drop there. Like pretty sudden, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've got a couple days to pull out the thick winter gear.
Yeah, I think I have to. I've been wearing like the regular boots. I'm going to have to get the insulated ones out. Yeah. Okay, it's that time. Thank you, Riley.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Riley Lachuk. He's our weather specialist here in Winnipeg, and he'll be back on Up to Speed hourly to update the forecast. You can also check him out later on television on the CBC Winnipeg News at 6. Well, it is 12:36 right now. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM and 990 AM in Winnipeg. We are at 100.9 FM in Thompson and 97.9 FM in Brandon. And you can also check us out on our YouTube channel. That's CBC Manitoba, and on our CBC Listen app. Well, as Riley and I were touching on, it's been a really mild November with most of the province missing out on snow until now. Winnipeg faced its first real blast of winter weather yesterday, while western Manitoba and the north have already been grappling with the white stuff since last week, and not to mention bitter cold in western Manitoba. Now, how ready were you for winter? And now that it's here, how does it change your daily life? Do you have any concerns around more winter weather ahead? Give us a call, 204-780-0893, or you can text us at 204-588-7355. And joining us on the line right now is Scott Kaler. He's president and chief scientist at WeatherLogics, and he can take your questions on the weather we're having in Manitoba, or the weather we've already had, or the weather we're going to have. Hi, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Coping with the snow. I think a lot of us are in that position right now. And, earlier this month, we spoke on the afternoon show here, Up to Speed, and you were quite sure that there would be snow in Winnipeg by the end of this month. And here we are. How did you know with such certainty that this would happen?
Well, I was just taking a look at the weather pattern and how it was going to evolve. At this time of year, once you switch to the really cold temperatures, it tends to be pretty hard to avoid snow because we've got a lot of moisture sitting around. We've got 2 big lakes just to the north of Winnipeg. Plus, we had a big winter storm moving across the prairies earlier this week. So when I looked at all those different factors, I just figured there's very little chance we're going to be able to avoid snow completely.
Yeah. And since we're talking about predictions, what kind of weather, do you expect, or winter weather, do you expect we're going to have in different parts of Winnipeg? If we look at, or of Manitoba rather, if we look at Winnipeg and Westman and the north, like, how's it going to look, do you think, this winter?
Well, I guess if we break it down into the short term and the longer term, just in the short term, we're in for kind of our first Arctic blast pretty early in the winter. And if you look at the calendar, it's actually not even winter yet, technically. So over the next couple of weeks, it's going to be pretty cold. We'll see below normal temperatures. Right now, the normal high is already down to -5, so days will be well below that as we move from late November to early December. Then beyond that, if I look even farther out into the long range, we do start to see signs of a warm up, maybe toward mid-December. Now, keep in mind, by that time of year, temperatures normally aren't very warm. So warm up doesn't mean we're going to suddenly go back to +10. It means maybe minus single digits rather than minus double digits. But the thing that we're really keeping an eye on this winter is what's called La Nina. So last winter, the big story was El Nino, which is the opposite. That's when the Pacific Ocean is warmer than normal. It brought us that really mild winter. This year we have the opposite, which is La Nina, which is a colder Pacific Ocean, but it's also looking like a weak La Nina event. And what that means is it just doesn't give us as much certainty about how the rest of the winter will play out. So overall, I expect it's going to be a winter with lots more ups and downs, lots more colder periods than we saw last winter, and more snow as well.
And so when you say a weak La Nina, how do you know that it's going to be a weaker one this year?
Well, just as we watch the temperatures in the Pacific Ocean trend over time, right now we're seeing that they're slowly dropping. They're getting colder, but they're not getting colder very quickly. And then when we look at some of the computer modeling and the forecasting that's done to try to predict the strength of La Nina, it just shows that it's not really going to become that intense this winter. And so that's why we're fairly confident it's going to be a weak one.
So does that mean it might not be as wet and cold as typical La Nina years?
Yeah, that's right. Because if you have a really strong La Nina, that's a better chance of a really cold and snowy winter, more wall to wall, so for the entire winter. Whereas where it's weaker, that means there's a lot more uncertainty, more potential for these ups and downs. And that's what I think we're going to see a lot of this winter.
Okay. And of course, we've been mentioning the unusual November weather we had, how it was much milder this fall than usual. A lot of people are thinking about climate change at this point. Like, what kind of an impact is that having on the winter?
Well, definitely the winter season is the part of the year in Winnipeg that's been getting the warmest, or has been warming the most quickly. So if we look throughout the year, our summer weather really hasn't changed that dramatically, especially in terms of temperature. But then as you go more and more into the cold season, so the deeper into winter you get, the more our climate is warmed. And just a tangible example that I like to share is the prevalence of -40 temperatures in Winnipeg. We often think as Manitobans that we brave these -40 temperatures all the time, but the reality is that rarely happens anymore. If you look back, you have to go all the way back, I think, to 2008 to find the last time Winnipeg hit -40 for the actual temperature. It's not talking about wind chill, just the air temperature. But if you go back much farther in our history, let's say back to the early part of the 20th century, -40 temperatures happen often many times a winter, almost every winter. So that's something that's changed a lot. And even now we're starting to see that -30s aren't even as common. So that part of the year is definitely getting warmer. Winnipeg winters are still going to be cold, but not nearly what they used to be.
And what kind of impact does that have on Manitoba if our winters aren't as cold as they typically were?
Well, one thing that we're seeing is that if we do get more of these warm winters, and last year's a really good example, so where you get the winters that are really well above normal, that changes a lot of things with respect to our snow cover. And if we don't have persistent snow cover throughout the winter, as we didn't last year, that affects lots of things like agriculture, for example, that relies on snow cover to help to prevent soil erosion, also helps to keep moisture available come springtime for the seeding period, gives you a nice head start with that. And, even things like, winter roads in the north, if winters keep warming, the means of transportation might have a shorter time window. So there's lots of possible impacts to that. And, we're just, really continuing to see that emerge as the climate gets warmer during the winter season.
Yeah. Well, we would love to hear from you, the audience, on this. Do you have any questions for Scott Kaler? He's ready to go. How ready were you for the winter blast yesterday or last week, depending on where you are in Manitoba? And now that it's here, how does this winter weather change your daily life? Do you have any concerns around more winter weather ahead or a milder winter weather ahead? Give us a call. The number is 204-780-0893. Again, that's 204-780-0893. You can also text us if that's a better option for you right now. And the number there is 204-588-7355. One more time, 204-588-7355. Well, Scott, I mentioned to Riley, you might have heard while we were speaking there, that I noticed the Red River really started to ice over yesterday. It was kind of starting to gel, the day before, but yesterday, it was the first day that you saw these big patches of ice. And that was the same day our first significant snowfall arrived. Why did the river start to ice up so suddenly like that?
Well, as the fall goes on, temperatures are dropping. And so, of course, that means that the water temperature is dropping too. And then oftentimes when you get the one really big cold air outbreak, that's what triggers it to finally freeze over. The thing about the Red River in Winnipeg, though, is that certain parts of it freeze more easily than others. With a river that's as windy as the Red River, certain bends have higher water travel speeds, and so those bends may freeze more slowly than parts of the river that are slower moving. There's also certain areas where might be discharge into the river from some sort of an industrial source, which keeps it from freezing. So there's different parts of the river that may freeze quicker than others because of that. But usually once you get this first really big outbreak of cold air, you at least see parts of it. And then as the winter goes on, some years, if it's really mild, some parts never freeze. And other years, it almost totally freezes over. So it can be quite variable. And that's just the nature of rivers because they have different speeds in different parts. It changes how they freeze over.
Right. So I wonder if you'd ever be able to predict, how long it might take for the river to freeze deeply enough to open up the skating trail that we love so much here on our rivers.
Well, I don't have a prediction for that off the top of my head, but just the way this winter's looking, I think there's a much better chance we'll have a longer season for skating than we did last year because we won't have such persistently mild weather. And likely, too, with this early cold snap, that should help to get some ice going a lot earlier in the year, whereas last year at this time, it was still so mild that that really wasn't even considered.
Okay, well, we'll just have to wait and cross our fingers on that. So we do have a call here. Alana. Oh, it turns out we have lost Alana, unfortunately. Okay. Sorry about that, Scott. Didn't mean to psych you out there. So how unusual has this November been compared to the averages, in different areas of Manitoba that we usually see?
Well, it's interesting because really just up until a few days ago when this colder weather started to hit, this November was on pace to be the warmest ever. But that was only through about the first, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks of the month. Now we're into the last part of the month, and because it's dropped off temperature-wise so quickly, that ranking has also dropped off. So now it's still a little tough to say where exactly we're going to stack up, but we might not even fall in the top 10 warmest Novembers now with this colder weather coming. And if you look farther west in western Manitoba, they had the colder weather arrive even a bit earlier because they had snowfall on the ground before the Red River Valley did. And at this time of year, the snow cover really plays a big role in temperatures. People think it might be because, snow is kind of ice and so it's cold and that's how it affects temperature. But really, actually, what it's doing is it's acting like a big mirror. So any sunlight that's coming in is being reflected by that white snow cover back into space. So as soon as you get the snow cover on the ground, any little sunlight we do get at this time of year goes back out into space and doesn't warm us up very much anymore.
Wow. Okay. And then we were talking earlier about the north and the, how the temperature affects the ability to transport goods and for people to move around up there. Like, how soon do you think it might be that the weather, might allow that transportation to happen? Or do you think it's kind of like the ice skating trail? We can't really predict that one?
Well, that one I don't have a prediction off the top of my head, but just based on the weather pattern that we're seeing, it does look like this colder air mass is building in a lot earlier this winter compared to last. And so I would anticipate that ice roads will be open earlier as well, but exactly when, I couldn't tell you just now, but definitely something that I think will be a little bit more favorable with the weather pattern we're seeing.
Okay. Well, Scott, it's so interesting. We really appreciate your expertise and taking time to join us here on Radio Noon today.
You're very welcome. Happy to do it.
Scott Kaler is president and chief scientist at WeatherLogix.
Manitoba's the kind of place that draws you in. Every day it's growing, it's changing. Just when you think you've got it figured out, though, there's something new to understand. I'm Marcy Marcusa, host of the CBC Daily Podcast. This is Manitoba. I've covered the news from the rail line in Churchill to the border in Emerson, and it's talking about the local stories that help us understand this place. That's what This is Manitoba is all about. Find it on CBC Listen or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Coming up on 10 minutes before 1 o'clock, and you're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM and 990 AM in Winnipeg. You can hear us in Swan River at 105.3 FM and in Puckatawagan at 102.5 FM or 690 AM. I'm Emily Brass, filling in as your host today, and you can check us out as well on the CBC Listen app and on the CBC Manitoba YouTube channel, where we're streaming live right now. Les Hey Babies are an indie folk trio out of New Brunswick, and they're proud Acadians who spent time in Louisiana to make their latest album, and they'll be on tour showcasing the new tunes in spring 2025. For now, here's their latest single. It's called Miroir.
Je crois j'ai trouvé un monde miroir, comme un déjà-vu. Je reconnais les gens qui sont de l'autre bord. Ils me reconnaissent-tu? Dur d'éviter des drôles de regards. Y a clairement une ligne qui nous sépare. Le reflet de la lumière ramène la chaleur du mois d'août. C'est écrit dans la bulle, ça donne le goût. Se voir ailleurs, faire comme chez nous. Oublier le vent qui me souffle dans le cou. Je bouge, ils font comme moi. Je danse devant un miroir. Comment laisse-tu savoir que ça bouge mieux de l'autre bord? C'est familier, les chants de sucre dorés d'une vie passée. Comment font-ils pour être aisés, si libérés? La lune se joue comme le soleil. La nuit debout jusqu'au réveil. Je bouge, ils font comme moi. Je danse devant un miroir. Je le casserai pour en faire un portail. Voir ce qui se cache derrière les mailles. Tout ce que je vais faire, c'est me rendre l'autre bord du miroir.
kind of 60s vibes in there, I'm getting. Out of New Brunswick, that was Les Hey Babies with Miroir. Well, we're almost 5 minutes away from 1 o'clock. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1. And coming up after this show is Unreserved with Rosanna Deerchild. And today's show is talking about city dwellers and how they have many animal neighbors. Carolyn Crawley says most people don't know that they share their city parks with turtles. So life isn't so easy for an urban turtle. They face threats from foot traffic, pets, fishing, an excess of predators, and pollution. But in the face of all of this, they have help. Enter Turtle Protectors. Crawley co-founded this Indigenous-led organization which helps safeguard the urban turtle population. And today on Unreserved, she'll share how the group's work is guided by Indigenous knowledge.
We teach volunteers the importance of seeing through Indigenous ways of knowing and being in a healthy relationship that's reciprocal with the land and with all the beings. And by doing so, we even talk about how do we speak about these relatives? What are the words that we use to reference them? So we don't use the words it or things to reference these living beings. That's like a colonial language which creates hierarchies to show that only humans are worthy enough to be referenced as not as a it or thing, and everybody else is. So, through our ways, we see all the beings in a circle, right? There are no hierarchies. This is the territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat. So, our Anishinaabe name is Michigan Gajajuan. Gajajuan, Michigan is referencing turtle, and Gajajuan is referencing that fierce protectiveness that a mama bear has for her cubs when protecting them. And so Henry Pinawanakwat translated our name into Anishinaabe. And it's important that when, there's a lot of talk about reconciliation, right? And, it's important for people to know that when you look at the actual Oxford Dictionary definition of reconciliation, it actually means to restore friendly relations. And, that kind of makes me chuckle, because if I was to think about the history of these lands, that there was a tiny, tiny percentage of that history may have been friendly relations, whether it was friendly relations with nations of peoples or friendly relations with the land. But most of that history was filled with violence and oppression. So we use the word reparations. So we're trying to right the wrongs that have happened, right, that have impacted turtle relatives and all relatives on the land. And so what we're trying to do is to minimize the human impacts upon these relatives, because these relatives were, thriving before the arrival of colonization. And since the arrival of colonization, these beings have become what Western science references as species at risk.
Carolyn Crawley is co-founder of the organization Turtle Protectors. She's Mi'kmaq, Black, and Irish. And this week's episode of Unreserved is all about turtles and the Indigenous people passing on their teachings. That show comes on right after the show. You can also listen to it anytime on the CBC Listen app. And coming up later in the afternoon at 3 o'clock is Up to Speed, and host Faith Fundal joins us in the studio. What's going on the show today, Faith?
Hello, Emily. The actions of Winnipeg police officers are under investigation after a video of an officer opening fire at a man was widely shared. That man died later in hospital. We're going to hear from the former Ontario Police Watchdog Director and a former top cop to talk more about that 25-second video that's shown up and what else likely is going to be happening behind the scenes as this investigation continues.
Really important conversation, and it sounds like it's going to be quite in depth.
Mm-hmm. We'll hear a lot about use of force. It's something that people have heard a lot from police as they talk about this incident.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you so much, Faith.
Thank you.
That's Faith Fundal. They're the host of Up to Speed. That's coming up later in the afternoon at 3 o'clock. Unreserved, as you heard, is coming up next. Well, thanks for listening to our show today. This is Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass, filling in today. With me are our studio technician, Marshall Hodgins. We have Dylan Longhurst as our show director, and Kevin Nipatebo is producing our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel. Hope you have a fantastic afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day.